Good day, everybody. This is Yin Yang with Morsels of a Thought number 1902. I'm in California. What else is there to say? I'm reading from George J. Chanos' book, Millennial Samurai. Excuse me. Book one. A Mindset for the 21st Century. I'd like to read to you chapter 132 on modern monetary theory, MMT. Okay, if you haven't heard about modern monetary theory, MMT, you will. It's the economic theory du jour, and it will be all over the news in the months to come leading up to the 2020 election. Harvard economist Joe Kenneth Galbraith, it's currently 6 years later, so yeah. The only, okay, Harvard economist John Kenneth Galbraith once said, the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. Sorry. MMT is a new way of looking at the economy. It's very seductive. Everyone gets a job and very different from conventional economic theory. I used to know somebody whose husband was hired to be on the presidential advisory committee. He was less than 30 years old, I think. Most economists believe that macroeconomic policy should stabilize the economy with the lightest possible touch, that it's better to let markets allocate resources. That's been the prevailing economic theory for decades, as popularized by Ronald Reagan's trickle-down theory, the idea that less government and lower taxes will stimulate the economy. I'm not a fan of trickle down, says George J. Chanos. We need more than a trickle to help those who are struggling. But is MMT the answer? Is it real? Relying on the fact that governments control their own currency, MMT argues that governments can spend untold sums to create jobs since they can always create more money to pay off debts in their own currency. They simply print it. The theory suggests that government spending can be used to grow the economy to its full capacity, fuel the private sector, reduce unemployment, and finance major programs such as universal health care, free college tuition, and the Green New Deal. Sounds great. No need to focus on deficits, we are told. Focus instead on the private sector surplus that deficit spending creates. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez likes MMT. According to Business Insider, she believes that MMT can fund the Green New Deal and should be a quote a larger part of the conversation, end quote. United States Senator and presidential candidate Bernie Sanders retains Stephanie Kelton as an economic advisor. She's a professor of public policy and economics at Stony Brook University and is one of the primary proponents of MMT. Kelton argues the best way to stabilize the economy and ensure full employment is to have the federal government guarantee every American a job. Those that agree with Kelton argue that increasing the deficit so that the government can invest in infrastructure and the labor force should not make anyone bearish on the stock market. It should make them bullish. Traditionally, economists have a very different view of money creation or money printing. They view it as being inherently bad for the economy. Paul Krugman, a Nobel Prize winning economist, says MMT's proponents engage in Calvin Ball, a game in the comic strip Calvin and Hobbes, in which players may change the rules on a whim. Larry Summers, a former United States Treasury Secretary now at Harvard University, recently called MMT the new voodoo economics. Voodoo. United States Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell recently told Congress that MMT is just wrong. Many of us are old enough to remember learning about the Weimar Republic in which the Weimar, Weimar, in which the German government, in defeat after World War I, printed money to pay its bills. And we know how that turned out. It resulted in hyperinflation. People needed wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy loaves of bread. More recent examples of governments running the printing presses to pay for the promises of misguided politicians, resulting in hyperinflation and economic collapse, include Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and Argentina. But MMP but MMT proponents point to Ben Bernanke's bailouts of the banks in 2008 and ask, why was there no inflation when Bernanke created $1 trillion by printing money to bail out the banks? MMT proponents argue that by insisting on balanced budgets, we're handicapping ourselves with an underperforming economy, increased unemployment, and lost opportunities. They point to Japan, which in 2019 is running a government debt of close to 240% of their GDP and has not experienced runaway inflation. The inflation rate in Japan is currently 0.29%. It's not the printing of money that causes inflation, MMT advocates argue. It's the lack of goods or labor or capacity that triggers inflation, they say. Only when the supply of labor, goods, or services becomes restricted will inflation become a threat, MMT proponents argue. MMT economists like Warren Mosler and Stephanie Kelton believe that the government should use its position as a monopoly issuer of the currency to ensure full employment. And they have some support on Wall Street, which we know is always looking out for the little guy. MMT proponents support the idea of a jobs guarantee program, which provides government funded jobs to everyone who wants or needs one. They argue that the existence of unemployment is de facto evidence that net government spending is, quote, too small, end quote. If MMT becomes United States economic policy, the stakes could not be higher. As Paul Krugman recently wrote in the New York Times, do the math, and it becomes clear that any attempt to extract too much from seniorage, SEIGNIORAGE, printing money, more than a few percent of GDP probably, leads to an infinite upward spiral in inflation. In effect, the currency is destroyed. The United States now has a deficit of 22 trillion, and we're currently adding a trillion a year. MMT advocates say no problem. As long as there is a supply of labor, goods, and services, we can just print more money. Big promises, which align with what we want to believe, are hard to resist. Bad Blood, Secrets and Lies in a Silicon Valley Startup tells the story of the fraud and overpromising that brought down a Silicon Valley sensation, Theranos, and its CEO, Elizabeth Holmes. My brother worked for Theranos, actually, until the end. The company had assembled a who's who board of directors and raised more than $700 million in funding on the promise of new technology that would revolutionize the blood testing industry. Theranos provides a cautionary tale of the perils of overpromising, the risks of confirmation bias, and, above all, the lure of a big idea. Holmes built her company on the promise of revolutionizing an entire industry. She claimed that the company's mini labs were, quote, the most important thing humanity has ever produced, end quote. Her claims generated incredible interest in and support for Theranos. Her board included former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State James Matisse, former Wells Fargo CEO Richard Kovacevic, and Bechtel Group Chairman Riley Bechtel. The problem was the company wasn't actually able to deliver on its claims. What all of these brilliant people bought into, according to the book's author, was a little more than digital snake oil. Is MMT any different? And will politicians like Maxine Waters, who serves as ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who serves with her, be better at making these kinds of assessments than those who were wrong about Theranos? Unlikely. So, as Auntie Maxine says, stay woke. Hmm, that's very interesting. Interesting that he should use an example of a company that my brother worked at. I used to have a brother that worked there. Okay, so next week we will go to 133, chapter 133 on social media. Okay, so I will talk to you again later and see you tomorrow. Uh, I will add on the temperature here is very high. So if you see me glowing, you'll know why. Okay, talk to you later. Old Kinderhook.